but if we do, please take a moment, unmute yourself, and tell us a little bit about you. Okay. How about fishing reports? Anybody have any good fishing reports? Okay.
Well, you guys went to Westover. How'd you guys do at Westover?
It was great, man.
Yeah,
Caught some big fish. It's fun there because they're so used to being caught and released. I feel like they know how to really spit a hook. So you really got to be fast with your set.
What was the hot fly down there?
I was having a lot of luck with light tan leech patterns. Jerry, what were you catching on?
On that pine squirrel and hurl. That's all I caught on, that one fly.
And
Yeah, usually the leeches are real good down there.
Yeah, leeches would be good too.
Priscilla was down there. Priscilla, did you have any luck? You're on mute now if you're talking.
What's kind of nice about that place down here is that you can fish different places. There's like a branch into the branch that you can fish. You can fish behind the lodge. You know, there's a lot of places to go.
Yeah, a lot of it was pretty shallow because it's been so dry, but there were still some good pools.
Did you guys fish that little stream they carved out a couple years back?
Is that the one like down from their pools, like the switchback sort of stream?
Yeah, it's coming out of that top lake, and it runs parallel to the creek.
Oh, I did fish that a little bit. I couldn't see a ton of trout in there, and the ones I did see were pretty lethargic. So I didn't have a ton of luck in there. I had a couple bites, but I wasn't able to get the strikes.
You know, I was talking to Brian Ellis, and he caught 12 out of that pond. And he said he caught 20 fish total that day.
Wow.
Pretty good.
Jake, will you let me in?
You should be in now. It's joining.
Thank you.
So yeah, good trip.
Okay, now I can see people. And I'll turn this off. Okay, well, for the officer's report, Steve Luckett, are you on?
He's not.
Okay. Outings, Ed, I don't think he's on. Next is, how about Stream Team? Do we have anything going on there?
I think that's all been canceled for the year.
Okay. As I said, next month, we're going to have a presentation on the St. Louis area trout ponds, and I'm going to primarily do that, but we're going to have hopefully going to have a guest from MDC, a local, the new local lady, Donna Otto, and she'll be ready to answer any questions. And since the season starts on November 1st, it's somewhat timely. How about Mike Ott? No. And any others?
Not much going on.
Nope.
Okay. How about a nominating committee report? I think he has a slate.
Yeah, we've got all the spots filled. And per the bylaws, the last two meetings of the year, we asked for nominations from the floor. I'm assuming those meetings will be the November and December meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, so next month and then the month after that, we'll ask for nominations from the floor. And then at the end of the December meeting, we'll close the nominations.
That sounds great. Thank you, Steve.
All the slots are spoken for.
Okay, good. With that, I think we should bring on Al to start the program.
All right, Al, you should be host now.
Okay, I'll see if I can get my share up here.
I can see
Okay,
it.
does everyone have a slide up on the screen?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, fine. Steve and I have kind of put this together. We're new at this stuff. We're one of those old timers that Jake talked about. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but we're going to try to struggle through it. Hopefully, we'll get through it. If you have questions, prefer that you ask them at the end. But if you want to ask one as we go along, I guess we can try to answer them at that time. As I said, we've never done this before, so this is new to us. We may not flow as smoothly as we want, but I think we can get through it. Basically, we're going to talk about reading the water. And I know you've all heard that 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish. And what separates them from an average angler to a good angler is that they have a proficient in the art of casting. One of the things that you need to learn to do is cast. It's very important to do some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. They have a basic knowledge of aquatic insects. They don't know the scientific names or those kinds of things, but they know what a mayfly looks like. They know probably where it's going to be located in the stream. They have a basic knowledge of Harry Bressler wants to come in. Okay, they have a basic knowledge of the food that trout eat. And we're basically talking about trout tonight. And they have a basic understanding of the species they're fishing for. We're going to talk about trout. So in order to talk about reading the water, you have to know a little bit about what the needs of a trout are. The needs of a trout then can be met by different sections of the stream. So basically what we're talking about is looking at a stream and seeing how it meets the needs of the trout. And that's what we really talk about when we're talking about reading the water. But like anything we do, this is not a science. It is a science, I guess, a little bit, but it's not an exact science. Just when you think you got things all figured out, as you all know, things go haywire and doesn't go as you think it will. So keep in mind that what we're talking about tonight, most of the time will prove true, but not always. There's always exceptions, always things that happen that will change your way of thinking or change what you're looking at. So what we're going to do is Steve's going to talk a little bit about the needs of a trout. And Steve, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. As you see up there on the picture, we have about shelter and safety, comfort, and food. And these are the needs they're going to have. The pH level. If you don't have enough, if you see a lot of weeds and everything else, you know that the range, it's nutrient rich. It should be between 7 and 10 on the pH level. And if it's got plenty of vegetation, which means it's rich water, go fish with sow bugs, scuds. They make a big difference on them. The pH gets really important on egg development, the size and the growth of the fish as they age, and if they're going to live or die. The invertebrates are big if you got high pH. If not, you can get yourself in trouble. The oxygen in the water, trout needs to have oxygen, and they always talk about dissolved oxygen, which is the DO. It's a dissolved gas that's in the water, and they breathe this oxygen by absorbing it through their gills. Oxygen gets in the water by either directly from the atmosphere, wind, and wave action. If you get a lot of wind and you see whitecaps and that on, she's putting oxygen in the water. And then the photosynthesis of the aquatic plants and plankton and that. We just for point of view, we were down on the North Fork, and all of a sudden they opened up the damn spillways, and we couldn't figure out why they got 3 spillways. Well, even though the water looked good, it was high, it wasn't low, it was flowing good. pH levels, or the oxygen levels, had dropped. They had to get oxygen into the river, so they opened up the dam. And we're talking about spillways. Juveniles and adults can sustain a lower dissolved oxygen level than the eggs and the sac fry. Optimally, it should be about 4 milligrams per, I guess that's liter. in a cool temperature of below 60 degrees. When it gets below 60 degrees, they start to get inactive and don't need that much oxygen. But they start
Hey,
stressing anything
Steve.
below 4. I hear you.
How do we tell the pH level of water and if we're at like the optimal levels?
You don't. We're trusting other people that, there's no way on this deal that we're going to be able to measure that I know of pH. In the parks, you can see they're always putting it in there. That's what all them tanks and that are up by the hatcheries are going. If it warms up, usually we start to lose, by warming up, I mean higher temperatures, we start to lose oxygen quick. And if you do catch a fish, you can kill the fish just by catching them and releasing them. So it's important, even though we're talking about reading the water, it's also talking about saving the fish because it's very stressful on them. Where was I going with that? I don't know. We want to make sure if we can get oxygen and it's above 6 milligrams, I think that's milligrams per liter in warm water, it can be lethal for the fish. Not if it's above it. It needs to be that. Anything below it can be lethal. Like 5 is starting to push things. And fish will undergo a lot of stress between 5 and 6. But Jake, to answer your question, and I see where you're coming from, there ain't no way we can tell that I know of. I don't know how you go out and
Most
measure
of the time, the
dissolved
locals
oxygen.
will tell you. Locals will tell you sometimes, the oxygen level is low. They know. It's amazing.
Optimal for temperature, the best temperature you can have is between 44 and 67. I don't know how they come up with that. When the water temperature hits 68, both species, meaning brown and rainbow, start to stress out in that. And if it continues to get up around 77 and above for an extended period of time, you'll kill off both species. It's not like the brown's going to last. The brown, I always say, will take a lot warmer water than the rainbow. It will, but when you start getting 77-degree water, you're going to have problems. On the temperature, they want to be looking for food, and as long as they feel good and they're in a comfortable place, they're not going to get very far from a food source. So if you can find the food, you'll find fish. We're going to have, hopefully we have a different presentation talking about how to find food sources. But when they're in the right temperature and they got food, they're happy campers. And they eat about everything. The basic knowledge of food that Al was talking about, that's really important so that you're not throwing stone flies in a place that there are no stone flies. You got to know what's in that river at that time. And shelter. We talked about shelter. That's protecting it from the water currents and from predators. If anybody's ever been in some water that's only about a foot deep and you got a lot of little trout running around and all of a sudden a bird flies over, you know what this is all about. They see that bird like nobody else sees, and they just scatter everywhere. But they like to be near current, even though they're lazy. They don't want to use any more energy than they have to. They want to survive, and that's why they want to be in that current, but not fast current, just enough to keep them going. And they want to find things that they can hide behind and be a little bit out of the main flow. They can also hide from the predators if they're behind rocks or under logs or in cutbacks. That's what we're talking about here. And it also, that same structure will block the current. So they might be right on the edge of the obstruction you see. Think of a rock. That's the best thing to think of. Or a tree, a half submerged tree. And he'll be close. Usually the biggest guy is behind it, down current. The next guy who can fit, he gets up in front. And then the smaller guys go on the side. And if that rock has a way to get the deep water, let's say it's sitting in 18 inches of water, but there's 4 foot deep hole about 3 foot away, biggest guy you got in the river is going to take that spot. And he takes it and he holds it so nobody else can get it. That's the big thing about watching for rocks and obstructions in the water. It's whoever's the biggest has the best spot. All right, Al.
Okay, Steve's talked about the needs of a fish. Let's kind of look at a trout stream. Every trout stream doesn't have all these different places in them. But these are some sections of a trout stream that you might have. We're not talking about tailwater here. We're talking about probably some freestone streams or some spring creeks. Most of the streams we have here in Missouri are spring creeks. And the setup they normally have riffles, runs, and pools. And then they go into the tail out and they start over sometimes with riffles, runs, and pools. They kind of repeat themselves as the streams that we have here in Missouri. Not always, and some of these things will be in different places. But that's typically the pattern that you'll find here in our streams. We start out and we look at waterfalls. Waterfalls really don't have any value for the trout. They're vertical. They go up and down. They can't stay in there. The real value of the waterfall is the plunge pool, which is at the bottom of that. Here, the trout have usually a bottom down here. Could have some boulders in it. Could have some rocks. Maybe bedrock. It may have some ledges in there. Could have some undercuts here underneath the falls. There's all kinds of things that could be in this area. Been to Benton Springs. I know you've seen guys stand on the dam down there and fish in that plunge pool right below the dam. It has a high level of oxygen in this area because of the what else going on here? There we go. Has a high level of oxygen in there because of the water coming over the dam. It has a lot of protection for the fish because it's usually fairly deep. The water is usually pretty choppy in that area. The food source can be pretty high because the insects may come over the dam down into this area. So it's a good place to fish. Usually a lot of fish in that area and a lot of people like to fish it. As you move on downstream, we get into what we call rapids. And rapids are really swift water, fast water, white water, bubbly water. And the gradient in these areas, come here, usually have boulders, bigger rocks that are much bigger in size. And the gradient here is pretty steep. Not always real deep, can be deep. The surface, as I said, is choppy. Therefore, there's a lot of protection there from predators. You've got big boulders in here, so you've got pockets behind these boulders where trout can get in. Steve was talking about trout looking for places to get out of the current. You can do that there. The mayflies that you find in rapids usually are clingers. The crawlers and the swimmers and the burrowers, they usually are swept away if they're in there. So the clinger is usually the most prevalent mayfly you find, and usually a little bigger size, probably around size 12. Also in these rapids, you find caddisflies of the case making type. They'll usually make their cases out of sand or gravel, something that has some ballast so it stays down to the bottom. And in these areas, you also, if you look for stoneflies, you'll have some bigger stoneflies. If there's salmon flies in the water, and I don't know if there's any places here in Missouri that have the salmon flies. I think the current does have a few, but there's also some golden stones in these areas. It's a moderately high area to meet the needs of trout. One of the reasons it's not a completely high area is because of all the rapids. It's sometimes very hard to stay in this area for fish. Usually it's a good area to high stick and fish the pockets behind it, which we'll talk about a little bit. Then we move downstream just a little bit and we get into riffles. And the riffles, as you can see, are not real deep. And usually you can define riffles as having chop in the water, but you can usually see rocks in the water. It's not really too deep most of the time. The rocks that we have here in the water are more football, basketball size. We have some smaller pebbles in the water. We may have some ledges in here. There's all kinds of places for insects to grow in this particular area. So it's a great area for insects to be. The surface is choppy. There's a lot of oxygen here in the water. It offers some protection for fish from predators, and it does offer a selection of insects. In the area down here, you can usually find crawlers. You can find caddisflies, usually the free living kind of caddisfly. Stoneflies can be located in there. It's a great area to fish. It's a great area for all kinds of aquatic insects. Here we go. Okay, we run downstream a little bit. We get into what we call runs or glides. If you'll notice, the bottom here is starting to even out. It's getting a little bit deeper. We have some rocks maybe at the top. We have some ledges in here, maybe some cracks. There may be some soil in here. The surface here is now smooth. It's a glide or a run. It's not near as fast as you get up here in the riffles. It's getting deeper. Trout don't have quite as much, expend quite as much effort to stay in one place because it isn't quite as fast. You can get some algae growth in here on the rocks in some places because of the sun and it's not real deep. Now we're talking about moderately sized rivers. Some big rivers, this could be very deep, and that could be true for the whole section. If you look at this in terms of insects, most of the time here you'll find crawlers and clingers. You'll find some stoneflies in here. Caddis flies usually are the case caddis. It's also a good place for crayfish, sculpins, those kinds of forage fish. You can also find a lot of forage fish in there. As you move downstream, you get into what we call the pool. And the
Hey,
pool
Al?
usually, yeah.
Now, can I mention that the temperature and the oxygen is usually really good in a run after that riffle. After it's done that, usually you just go back to Jake's question about that. It's a really good place, high oxygen. And the depth, usually it's starting to get a little deeper, so they got natural shelter.
Right,
That's
I'm
all.
sorry, I forgot to mention that, and that's a good point. It's correct. Okay. Okay, we get into the pool, and here, the top of the pool normally considered to be the throat. We get down here to the tail. The pool is a little different, and it's sometimes hard to tell a pool from a run. Basically, the difference between the two is that the pool really is much slower. The current's much slower. The pool also is the deepest place probably of any stream that we have. The bottom of this pool is usually made up of soil. It's made up of maybe sand. It's loam. It's not a rocky solid bottom usually. As a result, the insects that we find here, usually if we have a mayfly, it's probably a burrowing mayfly. Most of the fish foods that we find here are crayfish, leeches, forage fish, those kinds of things. The oxygen level here can be good. When it gets real warm in the summertime, though, sometimes the pool will lose its natural oxygen and the fish will go upstream a little bit to try to find some. A lot of times, though, they'll stay in here, and often you'll find maybe a spring in the bottom of a pool, which is a good place for them to get some oxygen. If you look at the throat up here, normally in the morning, the throat is a good place to fish. If you can see, the run drops off into this deeper pool. The insects that have hatched up above it will be floating down. They'll drop off into the pool, and it's a great place to fish during a hatch of anything up here in the run and the riffle. I don't think I've forgotten anything about that. We go on down and we get into an area which we call the flats. And if you'll notice the flats, the water's coming up. It's not quite as deep. Sun can penetrate this. It warms up a little bit. There's not as much oxygen here as there is in other places, but there still is enough oxygen for fish to live. Substrata here, you can see, has maybe some pebbles in it, has a lot of soil and loam. The current is flowing rather slow through here. So a lot of vegetation can get planted here. And flats sometimes are identified by the vegetation that's located there. The surface here, again, is smooth, just like it was in the pool. You can see vegetation in that area. There's a lot of insects that hatch here. You can look for little blue olives. You can look for betas, trichos, sulfurs. Since there's vegetation there, you can look for scuds, sow bugs. What else might be? Caddis. Normally the caddis are located in those areas, or case caddis. You can also locate some of the crayfish and sculpin and some of the other things that you had above. It's a highly rich area that doesn't offer near as much protection other than the vegetation's there. And if trout have a predator there, they'll probably get down in that vegetation and hide. It's probably the best place for them to hide. Okay, then we move on down to the tail of the pool. Come here. Tail of the pool. And you can notice we're starting to pick up some pebbles again and some rocks. Okay, we're starting to pick up some rocks and pebbles here. The current's starting to pick up. You can noticeably see that the current is going a little faster through here. It's usually pretty shallow. There's not much protection from predators. Usually it heats up a little faster down this area. So it's not a very good place to meet the needs of fish. However, that being said, in the evening time, a lot of times fish will come down into this tail area and they'll set up what we call feeding stations. And this is such, since this is so rich in insects, a lot of them will hatch and fish will sit up down here, even though they're subject to predators, they'll sit up down here and set up in a feeding station. You can see as you get on down here, then we're getting back into what we might call the riffle area. So we've gone from that kind of a traditional riffle run pool to a riffle run pool as you go on down. And those are kind of dividing us up. Again, as I said, it's not an exact science. Those gives you some ideas of what you might look for in each section of the stream. Steve?
Yep, seasonal transitions. What we're talking about here is spring, summer, fall, and winter, and what changes as far as your fishing patterns or ideas. In the spring, it's the best time to fish, in my opinion, and most other people. But a lot of the trout are coming out from wherever they were over the winter, and they begin to disperse throughout the stream. Over the winter, they've depleted all the fat they have, and now they're lean, usually a little bit hungry. So for trout, spring is all about food, and they haven't had much pressure on them, so they're a little easy to get, much easier to fish for in the spring and catch fish. The streams are usually clear, and they're beginning to warm, and the trout will come out of them deep holes that they were in the wintertime, and they'll start seeking and competing for them lies we were talking about. Who's the biggest, strongest guy behind which rock? And because these lies provide the food, the cover from predators, the break in the current, and it's comfortable for them. Remember, the trout, like any fish, they're looking for comfort. It's all about how little bit of energy do I have to expel to exist. Since the trout are cold-blooded and they're comfortable in the water temperatures between 50 and 65 degrees, in early spring, it usually takes 2 or 3 hours of sunlight to really start moving them. You go out in the spring and like in March and something, you don't really need to go fishing until about 11, 12 o'clock. Let the sun get on the water a little bit. And you would say, well, how can it warm it up much? I can't define that, but it does. You can always tell a big difference in it if you let the sun hit it for a while. In the summertime, water temperature is rising, and a lot of the streams will get to a level where they can't even support the trout. They got to move on. And for a number of reasons, one of them is they can't carry it's not carrying oxygen, and trout knows it's going to die if it stays there. So when the stream temperature reaches these levels, they'll leave wherever you could find them in the spring. If you're there in March and you caught a bunch of fish and you say, well, if I'm going there in June, I'll go to the same spot with the same thing. It may not help or work. They'll start looking for pockets of cool water that has a good supply of oxygen. Usually they're in deep riffles and runs, and they're looking for stream-bred springs or spring-fed tributaries. Otherwise, they head for the shade, because the shade, if that's the only thing they can do, they'll figure it's a little cooler there. In the fall, the stream has its lowest levels of the year usually. Water's crystal clear. Usually the surface is smooth. Trout are usually a little more spooky at this time, but they're starting to bring up the oxygen levels. That makes them active a little again. The cooling water brings in oxygen. So their major concern shifts from oxygen and comfort to cover from predators. Favorite daytime lies would be undercut banks, log jams, deep holes. And they'll venture out to feed only when they feel secure, which is usually during low light or bad weather. If it's really raining, it's a great time to go fishing for a number of reasons. Fall usually has less active fish, and your hatches are down. It's one of the most times you won't have hatches, although you do have hatches all year round. Don't forget that. The cooler water reduces their metabolism and their caloric needs. This coincides great. It's perfect because they got less food usually coming by, but for the fly fisher, on that given day, there are fewer active feeding fish. I don't even know what that means. Okay, it sounds good. It's just saying that it's a little bit harder usually in the fall to catch fish unless you can hit what they're feeding on. You won't get such a variety that you can hit that you could probably during the summer and the spring. In the wintertime, the streams they're still cooling off. Trout are really slowing down. They're searching for warm water and still looking for that cover from predators and comfort from the current. Their favorite winter lies are going to be deep holes and pools and runs in the stream bed that have springs in them because that spring is still putting out maybe about 55-degree water. In contrast, other times of year, trout are constantly willing to share their spots with other fish in the wintertime, whereas this don't happen any other time of the year. You'll usually find them in a pod. If you find one, you might find 10 of them in a pod. It's the only time they'll do that. They're going to feed much less aggressively in the winter. They're looking just for something easy to grab, usually in quiet waters with silky bottoms. Sunny days will trigger a mid-morning or even an evening midge hatch. You can see that it can be snowing and you'll have midge hatches. Smaller fish will come to the surface to feed on the emergers and the duns, but the larger fish typically will stay deep in the water column. So if you see this and you know it, and you see these little fish hitting this stuff on top, you'll know that the bigger fish are usually down lower. It's time to go to a tandem rig, a large weighted nymph with a trailing midge. Fish deep and slow is always a good winter strategy. Trout will not move very far to grab a bite. The water needs to be fished very thoroughly in the wintertime. Don't do it like you walk down the stream in the summertime and just keep throwing and walking. You got to be real thorough on the water that you cover before you give up on it. High water. What's the difference on high water? A lot of people think that it's going to be dirty water. It's not really all the time, especially if you fish tailwaters, which is below a dam. The water can be crystal clear and really start flowing. But when the heavy rains raise the level of the stream and the current strength, the trout have to go and they got to find a safe place to stay that they don't have to expend this energy. These locations are behind rocks and down trees, eddies, quiet areas near a seam by the main current. When a stream is really high and colored, the clearest water, remember, is always at the very bottom of the water column. And that's where the fish will be too. They're not going to be up like you see in this picture on the upper right. They don't want all that silt running through their gills. They're going to go as low as they can and stay in the cleanest water they can get. That don't mean they won't run out and grab something out of that dirty water, but you can count on the fact that they're just not going to sit there and try to be comfortable there. You need to keep your bait towards the bottom. Think about using a bead head or a weighted fly. Add some split shot. Keep your fly on the bottom as much as you can. They also need to be, you need to have some kind of an attractor, something bright. It's a good time to start using a glow ball on your top fly or a San Juan worm, something bright that'll attract them. I've seen them come a long way and at the very last second turn and hit your point fly. It just, that's the way things go. Target the right kind of water. When heavy rains have made water levels and increased the current strength, trout will always find the safest place in the main current. We talked about that. Choose a larger, brighter fly pattern. Think about long tippets, rigs. From your fly line, you might go out to 12 foot of 3X and 4X. Don't worry about a 5X leader system. Go heavier. Think about using fluorocarbon leader. The fluorocarbon leader gets you down a lot quicker than monofilament will. And then you don't need your little flies. You don't need dry flies usually. Think of something bright, large nymphs, bright attractors, streamers. Don't be afraid to go big. They need to see it. They need to make a little noise too. Don't be afraid of using split shot. Get it down. It's nothing to use A-B split shot on a rig just to get it down to the bottom. If you throw it in and you're going to travel 40 foot, let's say, on your drift, well, you may only have that bait at the right level, or your flies, I should say bait, your fly at the right level for only 10 foot of that whole cast. The rest of it's going down, then she's starting to rise. So make sure you get it down as quickly as you can. You can do that by rigging it up. Do it real close in front of you. Don't throw it all the way across the river. Yeah, you're gonna need, because you're gonna have to get the fly, whatever rig you got to get close to the fish. They're not going to come very far to get it, unless this high water is, like I say, tailwater, which is a lot clearer. All right, Al.
Okay, before I move on, I want to apologize. I wanted to show a slide here with dirty water a little bit and people fishing in it. I don't know if anybody noticed, but this guy's got a spinning rod over here, not a fly rod. I chastised him for that, but I went ahead and put the picture in there anyways. Okay, let's talk about specific places to fish. Okay, spring holes. I'm sure you all recognize the spring hole here at Bennett Springs. Meets every one of the trout's needs: comfort, food, and safety. And you can see a lot of people like to fish in this particular area up here in the spring holes. But spring holes also can be located along streams, along the current river. There's some places where there are little springs spot up and they drain into the current. Good place to fish. Because the water is turned a little bit different color. You got some oxygen there. It's cold, so it's a good place to fish. If you wet wade in the summertime and you wade through the stream and all of a sudden the stream feels cold when you're wading, there's probably a spring coming up from the bottom down there. Mark that in your mind, look at your location. Next time you come through there, fish that area before you wade through it. There's a good chance there's a spring there and you might find some fish. Okay, dams and falls, we've talked about this already a little bit. Primarily, we're looking at fishing the plunge pools below a dam. This is the area, and we've explained why that's really good. Food is here. There's some safety there, and you've got a high level of oxygen. So it's a good place to fish and look for fish. Okay, inside and outside bends. So, not all pools are straight. Some pools have a bend in them. And a lot of people will wade in here and they'll get out in here and they'll fish this side. And they forget that this side over here and the inside of the bend could have some fish. I've seen some nice fish around big rocks on the inside of a bend. So before you wade out over here and fish this far side, look what's happening in here. You might, you've got some pockets right here. You may have a drop off right here where the water goes from fairly shallow deeper. There's fish like to lay along those. Here again, you've got a pocket here. There's some good fish can be taken on the inside of the pool and fish that and look at that before you actually get out and try to fish this far side. Obviously, the far side's probably got deeper water. It's got protection, probably got a little higher level of oxygen. Fish like to hang out over there. The current's over there, probably the food line's over in that direction. So obviously, that's also a good place to fish. But the thing I want to point out, don't forget to look at the inside of a bend before you fish the outside. Okay, the drop off for edges. Mentioned earlier, when you go from a riffle or a run, not a riffle, excuse me, a run or a glide down into a pool, that glide will drop off into the pool and it usually gets deeper. If there's a hatch up in that glide or the riffle above and the insects are floating down, trout like to sit up down here and wait for these insects to come over. It's a nice feeding lane. They'll look for insects coming down, especially in the morning. You can see right here, we've got a cross right here. We've got probably almost a glide up here, a run. It's kind of smooth. And then over here, then it gets deeper. So this is a good place to catch fish. Cast your line up in here, let it float down into the deeper water. There's a good chance you'll pick up a fish. Okay.
Seems.
Al, what are you going to say about this? Al?
Yeah.
Weren't you going to talk about these seams? I show you were going to do, you had a thing about this that you wanted to talk about?
I thought you
Am I
were going
wrong?
to seams. You want me to do it?
Uh, yeah, as you got, yeah, go ahead. Just go if you got something planned there.
Go ahead, Al.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, you've seen the seams, and you know what the seam is normally where you got your main current, and you'll see slow
got one
water
here.
off to the side, whether it be either side. Well, you're taking.
Hold on
off
just
here.
a second, Steve, if you would. Steve, hold on just a second.
Gotcha. Go to 14.
Okay, let me start it again here. We went to the internet.
Can you hit 14, Al?
Yeah, I'll back up. $14.
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
seams.
Okay, have you seen that?
Yes, go ahead and run it again. Let's get the confusion out. Oh, come on, guys. There it goes. You see it's calm water, but you look out there like in the middle, and you're gonna see his finger come out there, and he's showing like the main current. Well, right along, you can see how the water don't have white caps or nothing on this side. That's a seam. That's a seam line right there. You're gonna have fish right where at the tip of his finger, almost under any circumstances. Naturally, you can't throw across and get that other seam, but there is a seam on the other side of it, and that's what we're looking at here. Probably the most predominant thing in fishing a seam is to get right on it and keep your, let's say, indicator where you're right along that, because the fish are sitting in that still water looking for something to come flying by, and they're going to dart out and grab it and bring it back. So you usually got fish lying there. All right, Al. 15's bubble lines, and bubble lines usually will end when you get done with some fast water. What you're looking at on the right here, that heavy, strong bubble line, it's going to have all the food in it. It's going to be a little bit slower than the water around it, and that indicates a seam right along there too. Bubble lines have food for every trout. It's just like it's the dinner bell saying that there's going to be something underneath there. They'll position themselves just aside of the bubble line and wait for the food to float down in that bubble line with the current. Fish the bubble line just like you would any seam that you've run into. In the picture on the left, you see it's kind of dispersed, sometimes called soft bubbles. And it's not the hard bubble line that you see up here on the right. It's a little bit, fish it as a seam also, because even though it's spreading out and it's not as fast, you got fish down there. It's a good place for them to hang out. Always follow the bubbles. We happen to be, Mike Sodurska was in a boat. He seen a bubble line, and he threw over there saying there should be a nice fish there, which there was. And he was right where he was supposed to be. And I think this happens a lot if you follow them bubble lines. A lot of people are now using clear and white indicators just so they look like bubbles. It's something to think about. They're not hard to see. You think they'd be harder to see, but they're not. You once you concentrate on them, you can make them out.
Steve, this bubble line right here was on the Norfolk River that we fished one day. And we started out fishing along through here and went closer and closer to the bubble line and did extremely well that day on this particular bubble line. I don't know if you remember that or not.
No, I really don't, but that's okay.
It was great fishing there.
I always think fishing the bubble line is a great sign. It's something really to keep an eye out for and to fish it. Okay. Eddies. Eddies can be really confusing, especially to a fly guy, because once you throw your line over an eddy, your line's going all kinds of different directions. But when the water's coming into a pool faster than it can get away from, it'll start making this whirlpool. And the fish will position themselves sometimes the wrong way because that water's swirling around inside that whirlpool. If you try to throw over it, you're going to get drag going one way in the one current, you're going to get drag coming the other way. But you look down, you'll see fish are pointing the wrong way. They're pointing downstream. Well, they're waiting for food to come around. All our parks have eddies in them that I can think of. And there's one down at Merrimack Springs. There's an old pole that crosses the river. I always thought it was a pipe, but whatever it might be, it's down that lower parking lot, and it looks like something just crossing the river. And you notice there'd always be bait fishermen that down there fishing below that, even though you don't see a whirlpool like you think of a classic whirlpool here. There is one there, and it swirls in that turn because it's making a hard right-hand turn. Always fishing, Eddie. Look, see what's going on. That's why a lot of times, if this clump of grass you see sticking out here had place was a little bit longer and somebody could stand on it, you know there's going to be fish on the right-hand side of that, where that whirlpool is. Think of Bennett up in them handicap things that stick out in zone 1. There's always fish in that backside. And there's usually fish because it slows down right along that edge. It's a good place to trap fish. Current speeds up because they stuck something out in the middle of the stream, and then she hits that open water and she makes a whirlpool. And it concentrates
cool.
the food stuff coming down the river just a little bit more than normal. Did you have something to say? All right. Feeder brooks is something, any time of the year you got to pay attention to it. It makes a big difference. This is where you have your main stream and a little creek or stream comes into it. 3 weeks ago, if you were down at Taneycomo, if you weren't around a feeder branch, you weren't going to catch any fish. You had to get around all the little feeders that were letting water in because it was putting more oxygen into it, and the fish were all hanging around there. The guys that didn't know, it looked kind of strange because you have the guides and that were all, it looked like in some very strange places. They were looking for that high oxygenated water. And that's what, like Al's saying, you can kind of figure out what's going on when you see guys, especially locals, in a weird place. It's usually bringing in cooler water, or it's bringing in higher oxygen water. So it attracts fish in the summertime because that cooler water and oxygen all time around, all time. Down the guys that fish North Fork River remember McClellan's. One of its big features was it had a really nice little creek come in there. And where that creek hit North Fork, it'd dig holes. It would do everything. There was always a lot of trout there. It was a great place to fish. In our trout parks, usually that's why you go to a hatchery outlet and there's people everywhere. And they seem to think it's because fish are trying to go back up the hatchery. There is probably some to that, but also that water is a little more comfortable for them. That's why they congregate. And they also know that food's going to come down through there any minute now. Because you pick that up behind Montauk, you see that in that one there where it comes out of the hatchery. People are always fishing there, and it's a great place to fish. And you can't count on where the fish will be. They're usually right in the seam where as you see these fish congregated there, I have found that right where the two things hit together and you can see the seam there where the two waters hit, fish will be right in the middle of it. Sometimes, some days, way better than others. And next one now. The next one's kind of the same. This is two, we're going to call them rivers. And you can see this is quite a contrast of what you see there. But the fish that would be in this, call it white water, he would move over into the blue, but he would hang around there just trying to catch stuff. So even though that's a real drastic shot of a seam or a channel, it's a good place to find fish. They're not going to be so much in that dirty water, but they will be in the blue water. Think of you're at Bennett Springs and you go down where the Niagara River comes in to the main stream. The spring can be really dirty and the river won't be dirty yet, and you'll hit this. You'll hit it in any river. Sometimes one half of the river is dirty and the other half's not. Always fish it clean, but fish it close to where it's having issues. Fish tend to gather there. The ones in the dirty water are still hanging there.
Steve, I fished Bennett Springs one time, and the spring water coming up was green. And that little creek that comes in by there on the other side of the road, it was pouring brown water into the stream. And there was a definite seam, just like you see here. And if you fish that seam I fished it with I think it was a 12 or 14 pheasant tail, and did extremely well fishing that area. But it was amazing. It was green where the spring water came out, brown where that little stream came into the park. It was just amazing to me that you could catch fish, but you did.
Yep. And you can see where this illustration he has on the right, it shows some ideas where to kind of favor. Make sure you watch rocks. Make sure you watch where them two streams come together. Same deal. Wherever you, like if you got an island out in a river, in a bigger river, and where it comes back together, it'll usually dig that out. It'll be some deeper water, but up close to that point there where you see the center illustration, it's usually a good place for fish. Plus on the left there where you see it's just a little protrusion coming into the main stream. It makes a great example of where not only the trout hang out, the food sources hang out. They go over there and hit that. They concentrate there. So it's a good place to fish.
Good, good.
Okay, pocket water and seams. A lot of times we've talked a little bit about pocket water a little bit, but if you look at this picture down here, I think this looks a little bit like the river run through it where Brad Pitt, he picks up that big fish behind that little knoll that comes out, and this is pocket water back here. So he was fishing pocket water when he picked up that fish. Got some more pocket water down here. Sometimes there'll be boulders out in the middle of the stream. You'll see slick areas where there's some pocket water in there. I fished the Shoshone, North Fork, the Shoshone out in Cody. There's several sections of stream out there that have maybe 20 or 30 of these, and the water is all running fairly quick. You have to hit the seam real quick, pick it up, go down, hit the next one as you go down the river. But you want to hit these pockets and you want to fish them. Here you can see a obstruction here in the middle, and you've got a pocket here in the middle of that. We've got slick areas here. We've got slick areas here. We want to look for slick areas, which indicate there's places where a trout might be holding in pockets. Okay, undercut banks. This is kind of a great picture. This is what Steve was talking about, the bubble line. This is a hard line. You can see the bubbles are pretty close together. We've got overhang here. We've got terrestrials, could be falling into the water in the summertime. We've probably got an undercut bank here in this area. We've got the bubbles going down through here. If you fish this, if you're fishing it with a dry fly or a terrestrial, you probably want to get this thing as close to the bank as you possibly can. That's one of the things we talked about earlier about being a good caster. You have to be able to get this thing up tight against the bank. There's a section on the lower Shoshone below the dam that looks like this, quite a few sections. And if you put your dry fly out in this area out here, you could forget it. But if you put it back here underneath the overhang just a little bit, good chance you're going to take a fish. Never pass an undercut. It's a great place for fish to be. Usually offers a lot of the things that the trout needs, comfort, food, and safety. Never pass one up and try to fish it best you can. Now, if I was fishing this with a nymph, I would probably start out fishing it on this side if I was a good fisherman and didn't disturb the water, and then go in just a little closer to the bank if I could. But I don't know how good my casting is, so I'll probably screw things up right away. Vegetation. Venice Springs is a good example. There's a lot of vegetation in the water. Down below we usually go in the water down below the last handicap ramp. Vegetation's pretty heavy in there. Doesn't always come to the surface. If you see fish hanging out above the vegetation, good idea to use a small indicator, maybe a midge or a small Beta's imitation. Usually catch fish. If you don't see fish up in the water column, we try to fish the places between. If we can find some places, where's my here? We find some places between the moss. We try to fish that, fish around areas where the trout might get back underneath the moss and come back out. Okay, structure. Anything that impedes the flow of water is considered a structure. If you look at the picture, we've got some slick areas. We've got areas where trout can hold. We've got rocks here that are impeding the flow of water. You might have a hump in the water. You might have a ledge. You might have a number of things that impede the flow of water. This particular picture, I think that's my buddy Joe Amanetti up there. This is on the White River. You can see this glide up here. We've got a rock underwater, but just high enough that it ruffles the water. So you've got some pocket water down here that we can fish. We've got the impeding of the water here. Over here, we've got some limbs in the water. Trout will hang out along these limbs, hang out along the edges of the seams here, go out, pick up the insects and food that comes through. So you want to make sure you look for these areas when you're fishing. Steve mentioned overhang trees for shade. Summertime, you'll find fish underneath these trees. Offers some pretty good protection from predators. If you get a big thick tree, if it's hanging low in the water, sometimes it's very hard to put a fly underneath here. Again, you have to have some casting skills, but fish often will hang out here. The water is usually a little bit cooler. You might have some insects falling off of the tree. You might have some ants or some beetles or some inchworms or something. A few years ago, I fished Argentina, and there was a little green inchworm falling off the trees into the water. We fished a little pattern underneath those trees and just knocked the snot out of the trout. It was just unbelievable. Don't overlook these places. It's an awful good place to fish, especially when there's the day is a hot summer day. Steve?
Ooh.
Standing water. Can I bring something else up, Al? The at Westover, a lot of you guys were at Westover this week, and there's a couple places there to have some very nice cutbacks, and they also got some under stumps. If you can get underneath them, you'll always catch a fish, and you'll catch the biggest fish there is in the stream. Westover's got a lot of nice places like that. Standing waves. If you see a stream and the whole thing just looks rough, you know that the bottom is going to be rocky. It's not just gravel sitting underneath there. So it's just rolling through there. Don't pass up this kind of water. It doesn't matter where you're going with it, and you're going to snag and you're going to do everything else, but you need to fish this water. Don't stop down through it. It's like if you're in a riffle, if you remember way back when we were talking about riffles, I don't know why, but sometimes we obsess about walking down the middle of the riffle. Don't do that either. Even though it's noisy underwater, don't add by you crunching rocks and that. Stay up on the side. Usually this isn't too deep, but it can be. Make sure you fish this water. Biggest places I've seen looks just like this is San Juan River. It's got big places like this. I don't know what made it, but it's got large areas. It's got these rolling contours on the bottom. Tailing pools. This is where the bigger river per se or stream comes down and narrows down real tight. As it narrows down, it's going to pick up velocity. It's your regular deal about whether it be air or water. It's going to pick up speed. And Al touched upon in the late afternoon, this is the hot spot. If you come down here, you're looking for stuff that's maybe hatched out during the day, and now she's all concentrating. Well, the fish know that, and they'll come down to this right where she starts to come together. Usually you're not going to catch much during the day, not in the morning or during the high sun times, but as soon as it starts to get evening, it's a good place to go, especially in the late summer. Don't ever pass this up. You also remember he did talk about that. Think about it when you're looking, let's just say you're at Bennett Springs and there's a hole in the river. Then it runs 4 foot and all of a sudden it goes down to 6 foot, let's just say. Think about what time of day it is when you're fishing that hole, whether you be upstream or downstream. Good place to fish. Don't even need cover there. All right, Al. This here, just saying next time, spend some time reading the water before you go stomping into it. Fish all the water. When you walk up to it, don't make a 30-foot cast. Make a 10-foot cast. Let it go. Then go to 15 foot, go to 20 foot, go to 25 foot. Them fish ain't going nowhere. It's only going to take you a little bit to do it. But fish all the water and look and see what's happening. If you catch a fish, look and see where you catch them. Where exactly did your indicator go down at? Was there a tree across the stream there you could see or something else? And sooner or later, you won't even have to think about it. You'll just, as you walk up to the stream, you'll naturally do that. And it'll make you a much better fisherman, and a much more productive fisherman. Now, Al said that him and I did this. That's a lie. Al did all of this. Al, he researched it and he put it together. So, it was done right. Other clubs. Where's Wayne? Wayne Simpson, he's up there on your screen. He called me last night and he says, we have a fly tying meeting every Wednesday. And he says, hey, he lives over on the western side of the state, central western side. He says, I the clubs I belong to, I learn more from you guys in 3 months than I can learn from them for some time. I want to join your club. And we're really happy to have him because Wayne's a tremendous fly tyer. Wayne has donated a lot to this club already for no reason except that I asked him. So I want to thank him for the good words. I really want to thank Al for putting this together because I think it was a great program, and I think anybody can learn something from it. I know I was reading it and I was learning stuff as I went along. So we thank you guys.
Hey,
Jake, I made you the.
Thank you,
Al,
Steve. It was very good, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Very
It
good.
wasn't
Good.
Steve,
Al.
it was Al.
Good job,
You missed
Al.
a point.
Well, okay, Al too, of course.
Thank you both.
Thank you both.
Al,
Wayne,
It's just that your picture popped on the screen here. No.
Oh.
hey,
Wayne,
Al,
what did you want to say?
hey,
Go,
Al,
Wayne.
that first daggone graphic you put out, you know what that remind me of? Bennett Springs, below the dam, under the bridge, down the riffles, right around the bluff hole, and dumping right out at the daggone hatchery outlet.
Right. That's
That's
exactly
the first thing I thought of.
That's exactly what it's set up. Most of our streams are set up like that. It's amazing.
And the other thing is that last one you showed of the overhangs, the weeds. How many of you ever fished at the Depew Creek, freshwater creek there, and south of Spring Creek, south of Livingston there, right next to the
No.
Yellowstone?
What was it?
It's
The
called the
Depew.
Depew Spring Creek.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we fished it. We fished it.
All right, if you look at that picture, you think about down the stream from where the cabin is,
Yeah,
what it looks like.
exactly. Exactly. Wayne, a little story on that. We were out, we had 4 guys from our club went out and fished it for the day. They came back and they'd caught 1 fish between the 4 of them for the day. So on we were going to fish on a Sunday, 4 of us. And on Saturday, we went out there and we stopped at the fly shop and there was 4 guys eating lunch there. And I asked them how many fish they caught. They said they hadn't caught a fish all day. And so the 4 of us that were going to fish it the next day, we said, man, oh man, I don't know what's going to go here. Next day we went out and fished it, and Joe Amanetti put on a Griffith gnat and he started knocking the crap out of them. And we put on a Griffith gnat with a little 18 or 20 zebra midge under it, and we just slayed the fish. It was just unbelievable. It was great. It was a great day, but we caught a lot of fish out there. This is a hard fish place to fish, though, no question.
Oh, yeah. I caught a nice big brown laying right underneath that grassy lip right in there, and I caught that daggone silly sucker underneath there with a daggone zebra midge.
Yep.
So don't
Yeah.
sell the old zebra short.
Zebra midge.
Right.
Don't ever
Thank you,
sell
Al.
a black zebra midge. Don't always have faith in it.
and
Jake, I
Jacob
turn this
for-
back over to you, okay?
And Jacob for, hosting this thing as usual.
No problem, guys.
Keep an eye out for the November meeting. Again, it's going to be urban fishing with the St. Louis area trout parks or trout ponds. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Okay, thank
Al.
you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Al.
Guys.
Thanks, guys. And this should be
Thanks,
uploaded
guys.
to our website in a few days. So just keep an eye out on ozarkflyfishers.org.
It'll be on the website. If anybody asks, that's where it'll be.
Yeah, then after like a month or so, it'll just be on our YouTube site, which I'm going to make it really easy to find on our website. So stand by. Fun things coming.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
much.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Steve.